Hey, party people. Today we are going to sew on an industrial sewing machine. I do have an older video just kind of going over all the parts of a industrial sewing machine. This is a Juki DDL 8700. It's written right there. So you can go check out that video for more information on the machine itself. But today we're going to sew on one. We are going to be sewing our corset toile, our first muslin. And I want to show you how to use an industrial sewing machine because I think people hear the word industrial and they get freaked out immediately. It is heavy duty. It's heavy. It comes attached with this table and everything. But once you get used to an industrial sewing machine, it's really a matter of like foot control more than anything. You can sew through so many more layers. You can sew through tougher materials without thinking that your machine is going to fall apart any second now. This machine is nearly 20 years old and it still looks and performs almost like new. So if you're in a place where you have a little room, honestly, this doesn't take up that much more room than setting a machine on a table and just leaving it there. Okay, I don't recommend industrial sewing machines to students who are in a more like physically fluid space in their lives where they're moving in and out of dorms and having 6-month leases on their apartments and not sewing all the time. You know what I mean? I don't recommend it for people who are living a more kind of transient lifestyle. But if you're in a place where you have your own space to make stuff, I sew leather on this thing, so we're going to be sewing my leather corset on this thing later on also. Quick checklist before we get started. I have my machine, scissors, I have my magnet or pin cushion for when I pull pins out of my muslin. Listen, this is the number one thing when you are sewing on a machine, any machine. Have plenty of pre-filled bobbins in the thread color you need. I'm sewing muslin. I don't care what thread color I'm using today, but make sure you have plenty. Nothing is more annoying than just you getting into the groove of sewing and you have to stop to wind freaking bobbins. Ugh. No. So make sure you have plenty of bobbins. All right, let's go. And a little scrap of muslin. And anytime I start sewing, I always check the tension here. And I always use a scrap of whatever material I'm actually sewing with, whatever cut up scrap I have from cutting the pattern out. And of course, doubled over because that's how we're going to sew it, right? So here we go. It's noisy because this doesn't have a servo motor or anything. And we are gonna set it here. And when I sew like toiles or anything where I might pull stitches, things like that, I set it at 3. Final garments, I'll do like a 2.5, slightly smaller stitch, like 8 to 10 stitches per inch. Okay, but I do a slightly bigger stitch when I'm just doing muslins and kind of fast draft work like that. This is our back tack bar. I don't actually know how it's done on a home sewing machine. I haven't been on a home sewing machine in a while. Anytime I pull this wheel to release the foot and the threads, I'm actually pushing out with the knee bar to raise the foot. I don't know if my knee is on camera. The tension looks fine, so we're moving on. Because I'm adding all kinds of boning to all the seams. And so I'm going to make sure that all the seam allowance always gets pushed to one side. I know some people like to press open their seam allowances, which is something you can do if you're going to be doing like a Hong Kong finish. Okay. But since I am going to be making bone channels out of my seam allowances, everything is going to be pushed to one side. And, you know, use your notches. Line up your notches. And if you need to pin, okay, I do recommend pinning across like this. So as you're sewing, you're pulling them out like that instead of trying to pull them up like this or down like this, okay? I mean, when you have more delicate fabrics than muslin, make sure that your pinholes are staying inside your seam allowance so you're not making more holes in a nice silk or something. With muslin, I kind of am like, whatever. I am trying to sew slower than normal. I don't think you're going to learn a lot by me just being like... I wanted to make sure that the seam allowance goes up here so that when I was sewing it, I made sure my seam allowance goes up. And then the other side. Okay. Got to be extra careful when you have things that are like muslin that have no face. You want to make sure you're making a left and a right instead of, you know, two lefts. When you're curving, when you're sewing a curve into a straight, you kind of have to straighten the curve in the fabric. So you want to put your needle down into the fabric where you want it, and then you want to kind of lay this out so that your edges are matching. And you know, when you back tack, you don't need to back tack like 7, 8, you know, stitches. Just like 2 or 3 is enough. Again, push this up. And I always like to start with my needle in the fabric, because if you just start sewing, like, it'll pull the thread, it'll unthread your needle. Like, always start with your needle in the fabric. I'll tell you. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to turn the seam allowance into bone channels. And my spiral steel bones are 1/4 inch. And I actually had to order more because I can't find any of my bones. Like, I still really haven't unpacked everything from my move. So I'm going to top stitch. So my seam allowances are in. And I'm going to top stitch 3/8 of the way down. You know, you just use whatever markers on your machine that make sense. if I look from where my needle is to this edge, it's exactly 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to use this edge to help me get started. Okay. And then now I'm looking at the distance between the edge of my sewing foot and the edge of, where my seam is. So I'm going to try to keep this consistent throughout so I can have a top stitching 3/8 of an inch away from that edge. And yeah, slow down if you need to. Generally speaking, top stitching takes a little bit longer because you just want to make sure everything is super beautiful. And I am going to put in a bone in there. Okay. Now on this side, this is a 1/4 inch, this is 1/2 inch, so I'm going to use the middle there to kind of determine where I need to be to start. And now this distance from the edge of my sewing foot to the seam is where I need to stay consistent. See, here's the middle. There's my center front notch at the top. And now I have these 2 bone channels. And then we have the next panel. Do you see this tape back here? I'm going to take a picture. I have this tape sitting along where my needle sits. So when I have seam allowance like this, I know what it's supposed to look like at 1/2 inch. You see that? That's how I know that this distance from the cut edge is 1/2 inch, even though they don't line up. Okay, they're different shapes. Use your notches, straighten your curve. Again, the seam allowance has to go up into the bra cup like this. Pin at the notch. Something like this, where it's really important that the seams line up, I want to make sure I pin that. Especially something so visible as like right at the breast. Seam allowances are going up. And sometimes you just walk the machine, which is fine. When you walk the machine, what you do is you slightly press on the pedal, just ever so slightly. And you hear the sewing machine engine engage and start to rev, just a little bit. And then it loosens up the wheel, and you start kind of walking it, wheeling it 1 stitch at a time. So when you're stuck in a hard place, like a tight curve or something, you hear that? Just enough to let go and just walk a stitch. Okay. Oh no. Oh no, I got it. I especially like to do it when I'm going over a thick spot and kind of control how it goes over the bumps, because we have like 8 layers of muslin right there. Ugh. I'm like a 1/16 of an inch off, but it's a 12. We're gonna let it go. I've heard other people say other things. The way I was taught in fashion school is seam allowances, I mean, except in this case where we're making bones, get pushed to the side seam. So from the front towards the side, and then from the back towards the side. So we're pushing this seam allowance here. Again, we're lining up that seam with this edge. And we're going to create a bone channel along this seam. And you want to spread this so you're not creating any bumps or bubbles. I'll tell you right now, I am not the most beautiful sewer in the world. I am way better at drawing than I am at sewing. I do enjoy sewing though. I'm just not super great at it. But do you see our corset starting to come to shape? If it helps you, okay, because sometimes it can really help some people to press the seams open. I mean, like press it so that all the seam allowance is sitting really smoothly to one side before you sew things like this. If it helps you to press seams where they need to go in between steps, go for it. I'm going to tell you a little trick that kind of only applies to old non-servo kind of motors like mine, which is actually a lot of machines. And these little zigzaggy things down here, they're called feed dogs. And what they do is they feed the fabric through the machine. They push your fabric along so that you're sewing along. It doesn't get stuck. Long story short, if you have two cut edges and one is slightly bigger than the other, like let's say you're easing something into another seam, it can actually help to have the longer piece along the bottom, so it's getting pushed through by the feed dogs, and you just ever so slightly tugging the top layer. Okay, so the slightly longer piece on the bottom, evenly pushed through the machine by the feed dogs, and the top one just ever so slightly stretched. Okay, not big old yanks. Okay, we're not warping the whole thing out of shape. Okay, and do that until to where your notches match up. Okay. And it does help. Okay. But that is only for old non-servo machines like mine. And I mentioned that because, like I said, this is a 20-year-old machine. It still works like magical, brand new baby. So, you know, go get an old machine that's been taken care of fairly well, and you'll be good. You'll be good. So I got the slightly longer bottom that I'm easing in. And when you have a curvy seam, you know, just manipulate a little bit at a time, you know. If I'm gonna lift and kind of push fabric around, make sure that the needle is down into your fabric anytime you want to lift your foot pedal and kind of maneuver your fabric so you're not losing your place. And again, sometimes, you know, a lot of people will be more comfortable with pressing this open before you stitch the bone channeling. So go ahead and do that. That's the thing about sewing leather is like when you top stitch leather, that's it. Those holes are there forever. Muslin, you gotta pick them out, steam press things closed. Panel number 5. Sewing takes a long time when you gotta explain everything. I mean, I'm not the best sewer in the world, but this situation definitely feels like when someone's trying to watch you type, and all of a sudden you type hella slow. I think this is the first time I've actually sewn on the channel, because I've always had Mariah come by. Alas, y'all stuck with me now. I kind of decided that I wanted to put bone channels here, so I actually put notches where I wanted those bone channels. So we're going to top stitch those first. See, again, I have this piece of tape back here that lines up with where my needle sits. So now I know where to put this notch and follow it up. I know there's like little magnets that are made specifically to sit where you want the edge to be so that you can maneuver precise measurements. You can get something like that also. But yeah, this is, each is 3/8 of an inch. I have the notch back here lined up with my tape. Like little white threads all over. And yeah, you kind of have to watch down here and your needle at the same time. But you know, that's what you have two eyes for. I'm kidding. I know that's not how eyes work. Eh. It just means the thread is looped around my foot. First, you want to make sure your needle is down in the fabric, lift it up, and just, there you go. And at this point, if you've gotten this far and you're like, you know what? It is not that different from a home machine, you would be correct. It's really not. It's just more power. You know, you're sitting at a V8 engine after driving your little Honda Civic for a while. Okay, so I'm gonna put bones in there. Okay, see, I'm gonna line up these notches. It's gonna sit like that, right? So as I was saying, it's kind of like switching to a V8 engine. You have more power, but the mechanics are the same, you know? The gas pedal, the brake, you know, the steering wheel. Like, it's not like all those things all of a sudden become completely foreign. Pretty much everything is in the same place in every car, or similar spots. The tension is a tiny bit loose on the single layer, which makes sense. But I'm not going to mess with the tension because the seams with all the multiple layers are more important than some loose top stitching on a single layer. So I'm going to leave it alone. Match those notches, kind of straighten those curves together. You know, I really like the look. See that? I like the look of the 3. I'm going to have 3, and then 3, and then the back is going to have 3. I like that look. Oh my God, who is watching the Olympics? I freaking love the Olympics. I was like rooting for those 2 big Algerian wins. The boxer and the gymnast. Amazing. Good for them. I don't even have any connection to Algeria. Never been. Never really thought about Algeria too much, to be honest. But, you know, these Olympic stories, man, they really just, they resonate. They resonate. Okay? All right. Where are we? We've got... And then, we're nearing the end. Okay. You have these here as a cheat sheet, but you should be able to kind of figure out where things are going to go, you know, depending on where your notches are. Remember, this one, we had the 3 notches so that we could match up the 3 notches here. That's what makes these pieces distinct. And that's how they're going to line up here, along these 3 notches. 3 little pigs, 3 little notches. Of course, I love the South Korean sharpshooter, who won silver. Kim Ye-ji, how freaking cool was she? My goodness. The U.S. gymnastics team. The Woodalls, Tara Davis Woodall. And her husband, who is also in the Paralympics. How freaking cute are they? The cutest. Also, the shooter from Turkey. You know, they're always, you know, they always say nobody remembers who came in second. The Turkish sharpshooter who won silver, and the South Korean woman who won silver. Do you, like off the top of your head, remember who won gold in their categories? No, we all remembering silver right now. Now this one, we're going towards the back, and so we're pushing the seam allowance this direction now. We're going this way. Because this is the side panel, remember? So now the seam allowances are going this way. It's getting tight up here. I might need to kind of fix it a little bit and widen that piece, move the seams a tiny bit so that they're not so close together. This piece is kind of nondescript, so again, it's good to have these 3 notches to match up. I should have mentioned it when I was doing the bra cups, but sometimes when you have really tight curves like this, it can actually help to shorten your stitch to like a 2.5, even with like a toile like this, because the stitches are tighter and smaller, so you're getting tighter curves with the little itty bitty dash lines. Again, if you're fussing around with your garment while you're talking to your class, to your classmates, and, you know, moving things around, make sure your needle is in your fabric so you don't lose your space. Here is our back panel. Second to last, home stretch. Home stretch, baby. You still with me? You still with me? This goes like that. Okay. And again, if you don't remember, just match up your notches. That's why when you notch these pieces, like you want to notch kind of randomly. Like I have waist notches that's kind of in the middle, but that's a specific purpose. The rest of your notches should be random and uneven, asymmetrical. Like this one is up here, this one is down here, so that, you know, it's really hard to miss up this misalignment, okay? That's the whole point of notches, because your sewers, whoever's sewing your garment, okay, they are not going to have access to the pattern, and so they just kind of have to figure it out by how generally the shapes are, the notches, you know, looking at your sew by sample. That's why factories love a sew by sample, more than a tech pack. They love a sew by sample. The garment is sewn exactly the way you want it. And so all their sewers can just refer to it whenever they need to. Okay. They might not ever crack open a tech pack, but they'll look at that sew by and be like, oh, okay, it needs to be sewn like this. Oh, it needs to be sewn like this, but I'm missing this piece. So I got to go talk to the cutter. You know, I don't have this doodad. Oh, wait, this piece is supposed to be embroidered before I sew it, but it's not embroidered. Better talk, you know. Like, all of that is so key. The sew by sample is more of the Bible for, you know, production sewers than your tech pack. And again, the seam allowance going towards the side seam. I would have to say that the best my favorite social media post coming from the Olympics would be Suni Lee doing that meme, except with the twist where she is showing herself falling off the beam. Unfortunately, I did get picked to go to the Olympics. I love someone who can laugh at themselves. And that post had me cackling. Oh my God. Listen, when you do a top stitch, you always want to do it from the surface. Okay? You always want to see how it's going to look like on the surface. So, you know, when you're sewing a seam, whether you do it like this or like this, doesn't really matter that much. But when you do top stitching, you want to do it from the top. You want to make sure everything is smoothed out. You don't want any surprises. You want to be doing it the way you want it to look and see everything in process as you're stitching. So always top stitch from the surface. Top. And of course, I love all of Snoop's coverage. I love Snoop. I was in junior high when that first album came out. And listen, the only reason I didn't get in trouble is because my parents didn't know, speaking of English, to tell what the hell he was talking about. Like, all my American friends are like, oh my God, I can't have that because I'll get so busted. I'm like, not me. My dad ain't got no idea what gin and juice is, okay? I mean, he got some clue, but not really a clue, you know? Not in the context of that song, anyway. You know what I mean. Last pieces. Whoop, whoop. Yeah, and we're going to press all these ripples out. See, when you press them out, it's going to look nice and smooth. Nice and smooth. It's going to look pretty. And then we're going to put it on the dress form. And we're going to have a little fitting. This one, the seam allowance is going to go this way because we're going to put bones on either side. And then the grommets are going to sit in the middle. So this is a very specific sort of situation. If you watch Bridal Sewing Techniques, she very recently did a video where she bought a bunch of weird, like sewing gadgets that she's never used before. And there was one where it was like a tiny iron. And I'm like, it could sit like right here. And I could sew, I could press seams in between, you know, seams without having to get up. And I'm like, I kind of want that. And we were DMing about it, and I was like, I kind of want that baby iron that you can sit like just right at your sewing table and just press, you know, little corners and seam allowances and stuff while in the middle of sewing so you're not getting up all the time. And she's like, yeah, go get it. It's actually quite legit. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get it if I do any more sewing. If I'm not going to do much sewing this year, forget it. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew 1/2 inch top stitching all the way around the top and the bottom, because that's actually going to be where my finished edge is, and I want to see that when I put this on the dress form. And then that's the corner. Stick your needle in and then pivot. And And then you can walk it to the edge. Keep your needle in. Pivot. Okay. Pivot again. Always keep that needle right at the seam. Keep the needle down, pivot. Again, always sew top stitching from the top. Just get in that habit. You know, with my luck, it's always been those super long seams where I lose the bobbin. All right, so here we are. And that's it. And stay tuned for the next in this series. I'm going to put this on the dress form. Okay, there you go. I'm going to put this on the dress form. We're going to fit it. We're going to make corrections. And not just fit corrections, but design corrections. Because, you know, fittings are all about making it look the best, and that involves fit, that involves moving seams, you know, all that good stuff. All right, so put your video requests in the comment section below. Please give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new today. Share, subscribe, all the ways you show me love, and I will see you in the next video.